The other day, I got an email from a viewer, and he wrote, "Hi Chris, would you consider sometime in the future doing an installment where you compile some of the things you've said over the years about how you keep your builds economical? Like things you do to keep costs down versus stuff you feel like you can't skimp on, etc." Just asking because I recently tallied up the cost for materials on a base I've been building, and it's like over $1,000. Now, most of that is from buying high-end parts. I would say the wood itself cost maybe $220. Zebra wood, swamp ash, maple, and a spalted maple top. But still, I don't mind because this is just a hobby for me, and I can afford it. But it does make me wonder how anyone who wants to build and sell instruments would approach the economy of it. Thanks. Well, that's kind of what I want to talk about in this video. Some of the things that you can do to keep the cost of a guitar build down. So what I've done is I've compiled a list of 10 different tips. Now, before I get into this, it's important to understand that as you're watching this video, your situation and circumstances are not necessarily the same as anybody else's. So some of these tips that I'm going to offer will require certain situations and certain types of equipment and skill sets in order to be able to realize their value. And that may not be something that you or other folks watching may have, but others will. So just keep that in mind as I describe these tips. So the first tip that I wanted to offer is to shop locally for your lumber. That's not possible for everybody, but if you have lumber suppliers near where you live, chances are the cost of the lumber is going to be a lot cheaper than it is to buy it online. The other advantage of doing that is you actually get to see the wood, hold it and feel it, and get an idea of what you're getting before you pay your money for it. You can't do that when you're purchasing lumber online. The other problem is when you're purchasing online, oftentimes the lumber suppliers are very niche specific about who they're trying to market their products to. So whenever you see lumber advertised as luthier grade or instrument grade, you're paying a premium for that wood. And in reality, it's usually not that much different than what you can find from a decent local lumber supplier. And the local lumber suppliers are typically trying to cater to a much broader customer base. So it can be anything from construction to home improvement, furniture makers, cabinet makers, trim installers, hobby woodworkers. So they're not really that concerned with trying to market their wood to any specific niche. They're just trying to get it out there, and the price usually reflects that. It's much cheaper. Also, in many cases, the lumber you're buying is fairly raw. It may be dry, but it hasn't been cut, planed, and sanded. So that's work that you would have to do yourself. But you can save a significant amount of money purchasing your lumber locally. The second tip, and this is kind of related to the first tip, is to process your own lumber. Now again, this is something that not everybody can do because it does require that you have certain tools and a certain skill set. Of course, you can find somebody who does have the tools and the skill set to help you out, and that can save you money. But you're going to need, at the minimum, a table saw, a joiner, and a planer. But with these tools, you can buy your inexpensive raw lumber and then process and produce your own blanks. If you try to buy blanks online that are already made, like body blanks, neck blanks, and fretboard blanks, you're going to be paying significantly more money for those than if you were to process the wood yourself and make your own blanks. So that's something to consider. It's definitely a way to save a great deal of money when preparing blanks. Now, one thing you should keep in mind though, is oftentimes when you're buying the lumber, you're getting a lot more than what you actually need, even though it's a lot cheaper than buying it pre-processed. However, what you can do is cut it up and get the blanks you need, and then you could consider selling the remaining blanks to kind of recoup your costs. And in the end, you can end up with what amounts to free wood for your guitar build. So that's just something to consider. The third tip is to look for lower cost alternatives to the wood that you're hoping to use. So instead of that swamp ash or that really gorgeous piece of genuine mahogany, consider alder instead, or poplar, or basswood. Those woods are a lot cheaper, and this will allow you to build your guitar at a considerably lower cost. When it comes to, for example, guitar necks, instead of using figured maple, which usually is a little bit more expensive, you could just go with plain hard maple. After all, you're only looking at the front of the guitar anyways. Most people don't pay any attention to what's on the back of the neck. You're the only one that would know that. So if you can live with that, go with just a plain maple. As far as fretboards are concerned, the most popular are maple, ebony, and the traditional rosewoods. But nowadays, there are a lot of other hard woods that you can use for fretboards. I would just encourage you to look for woods that have a Janka hardness over 1500. And there you're going to find in a lot of lumber suppliers, there are all kinds of species of wood that would match that criteria. So you can get wood that's hard enough to hold the frets, but quite a bit less expensive than ebony or rosewood. Tip number 4. Join a local woodworking club or cooperative. In many communities, there are clubs that you can join where you can take advantage of the expertise of the other members, and oftentimes they have all the equipment that you could ever want to process all the wood for keeping your guitar build inexpensive. There's another possibility here, this is sort of along the lines of the cooperatives, is that you can do a search in your community for businesses that will rent space for you to do your woodworking. And they oftentimes will have all the machines that you would ever need to use. And in some cases that includes CNC technology as well. So you would probably want to do a Google search for a woodworking shop space rental type of situation locally to wherever you live. And that can help you to save a lot of money, but at the same time, give you that exposure to those other members who have the experience to help you along your journey of building your guitar. Tip number 5, use quality budget parts. You may want to equip your guitar with Hipshot tuners or Schaller tuners or Grover tuners, a genuine Floyd Rose bridge, a Schaller Floyd Rose bridge, Tone Pros tune-o-matic bridges, all those high-end, high-quality parts. But those prices can add up fast and make your build really expensive. As an alternative, there are a lot of companies out there that make almost like no-name components that are much cheaper but of very high quality. You can also consider going with other brands which sell budget components such as Gato and Geiger. And there's a few others out there. But back in the old days when I first started building guitars, I was trying to save money by purchasing products and components from overseas, which means China, Vietnam, Korea. And oftentimes when those parts arrived, I'd open up the box, I'd look at the part, and I'd just throw it in the trash because there was no way I could use that part on a guitar because the quality was so poor. In fact, you've probably heard the term pot metal bridges, pot metal tuners. They're junk. Well, those times have changed, and there's a lot of no-name parts coming out of China and Korea and Vietnam that are very high quality. So you can consider those instead of purchasing the really expensive components, and that's definitely going to lower the cost of your guitar build. And a lot of those parts you would purchase from eBay, AliExpress, they're on Amazon, Banggood, Temu, TomTop, all those different online sites. Just be aware though that some of the prices have come up, I've noticed, and I have a feeling that has something to do with tariffs. But it's still a lot cheaper than buying the really high-end brand name components. Now, kind of related to that is tip number 6, and that is to use cheap parts with the goal of eventually replacing them with the better parts as money becomes available. So as you build your guitar, you could opt for example, a licensed Floyd Rose knockoff, knowing that eventually down the road, you're going to replace it with that FU Tone titanium high-end custom Floyd Rose style bridge. Obviously, that's an expensive bridge to choose, so you could, instead of using that, use the cheaper one to keep the cost of your build down, and then when the money becomes available, you can purchase the more expensive part and swap it out. That's same is true with tuners and pickups and all the other different types of bridges, like the Fender style hardtail and tremolo bridges, as well as the Gibson style tune-o-matic bridges. You can buy cheaper knockoff copies as you're building your guitar and then replace those down the road with better quality parts. But if you're going to do that, you need to make sure that when you're planning your build, that part that you're going to buy, that cheap part that you're going to buy, you can swap it out with the higher end part and it will be a direct replacement. So in other words, if you're going to use a licensed cheap Floyd Rose knockoff, you want to make sure that the mounting scenario is going to match the high-end one that you want to replace it with down the road, because then it's just a matter of swapping it out. Same thing with like the tuners. Tuners can have mounting holes in different locations, so you want to make sure that whatever cheap one you're going to use is going to line up with the better quality one that you plan to eventually replace it with. That way you don't have to drill a lot of holes in your headstock. Pickups are pretty straightforward. Humbuckers and single coils usually have similar footprints, whether you're buying the cheap versions or the more expensive versions. So in most cases, that's a direct swap out, but double check it just to make sure. Hey guys, if you're enjoying this video, I would encourage you to stop what you're doing right now and click that thumbs up button down below. It doesn't cost you anything and it really helps to support my channel. But if you want to take your support to the next level, you can click the thanks button and leave a tip in the amount that you think is fair. Also, you can click the join button and become a member of my channel. And as a member, you'll have access to exclusive members-only content, which are videos just like the one you're watching, but with a lot more detail, a lot more tips and tricks and all kinds of guitar building secrets. And best of all, no ads. Now let's get back to the video. Okay, on to tip number 7. Make your own parts. Now, I know that sounds pretty crazy. You know, after all, making tuners, how in the world would you do that? Or how would you make a bridge? Well, some of you out there watching this will have access to machining equipment, mills and that sort of thing. Some of you may even have access or even own a CNC mill. With tools like that, you can make a lot of your own parts. You can make your own bridge. You can make your own tuning machines. When I first started building guitars, I decided I wanted to make my own pickups because I very quickly realized if I wound my own pickups, I could save a considerable amount of money. I could buy all the parts to make a humbucker for about 10 bucks and make it myself and end up with a pickup that's every bit as high quality as the most expensive brand name off-the-shelf pickups. And that's what I've done ever since. So you can go down that road, make your own pickups. This is a tip that's not for everybody, but I've always felt that if the acoustic guitar builder can control and determine the tone of the instrument that they're building by how they shape and sand and prepare the wood, the person building an electric guitar ought to be able to do that by making their own pickups, because you can dramatically alter and affect the sound of the instrument that you're going to build by how you wind the pickups. So that becomes sort of part of the whole process of building an instrument that is truly your own design. So making your own parts is one possible option. Not for everybody, but it's one to consider. Tip number 8. Go to a pawn shop and look for a guitar that has the components that you would like to use on your guitar build. Now, it doesn't have to be a pawn shop. You could go on to Facebook Marketplace or look on eBay or Reverb and try and find an inexpensive used guitar that has the components that you want to use. In most cases, like pickups, they don't wear out. They just get dirty. So you can clean them up and they're just as good as new. Tuners, yeah, you may have to do some lubrication work, but as long as they're functioning properly, they're going to work fine. Same thing with bridges. But what you could end up doing is purchasing all the components for your guitar all at once and spending far less money than if you purchase them individually for your guitar build. Plus, you have the shell of a guitar after you removed all those parts. You can use that to practice some of your techniques for leveling, crowning, and dressing frets. You can use it to practice and test out different finishing ideas. So there's all sorts of things that you could do with it. You could even remove the fretboard and pull the truss rod out and use that in your guitar build as well. You can't probably use the frets or the nut, but most everything else on the guitar you'd be able to use on your build, and assuming you're able to purchase a used guitar for a fairly cheap price, that's one great option for keeping the price of your new guitar build down. And then, like I did in tip number 6, over time you can replace the used components with brand new ones that are of a higher quality. Okay, so we're on to tip number 9. Now this one is definitely not for everybody. Start a legitimate guitar building business. Pick a name, design your logo, get your LLC, and you're now a business. Of course, you're going to have to be building and selling guitars in order for it to be a legitimate business. And it's important to understand here what I'm about to say. I am not an accountant, nor am I an attorney, so I really can't give specific advice. But what I can say is, at least here in the United States, and this is probably true in other parts of the world, when you have a business, there are certain advantages financially. There are certain tax considerations. But more importantly, this is where tip 10 comes into play. With tip 10, you can, if you have a business, you can apply at different retailers and manufacturers for a wholesale account. And what that means is you're able to purchase parts from them, usually at about half the price that you would normally pay, because you're going to resell the instrument that you're going to build. Obviously, this is for people who are in the business of making and selling guitars, and many of you watching are just looking to build one guitar for yourself. So tips 9 and 10 may not apply. But if you're kind of thinking about going down that road, maybe you want to turn your hobby into a self-sustaining hobby, turn it into a business. Register it as a business and take advantages of whatever potential tax benefits there are, as well as the opportunity to set up wholesale accounts at your retailers and your lumber suppliers. I have wholesaler accounts from all my local lumber suppliers, and I get lumber significantly cheaper than if I was just walking it off the street as an ordinary customer and paying for it. So those are basically the 10 tips that I have. Now, one thing that was mentioned in that letter is, what are the things that you absolutely can't skimp on? Well, in my opinion, when it comes to guitars, there's two things that you absolutely can't skimp on, and it's only because it's just too difficult to try to swap it out for something better later on, and that is the frets and the bone nut, or the nut, whatever kind of nut you're going to use on the guitar. If you're making a nut, whether it's bone or graphite or a composite of some kind, it has to be made for the guitar, and you really can't plan on swapping it out for something better later on. I mean, I suppose you could go from bone to graphite, and that would be one swap that would potentially improve the quality of the guitar, and it does cost more. But the nut really has to be made for that guitar, and it's not something that I would advise you to try to skimp on to save cost. Frets are the same way. Once they're installed, they're installed. So if you are thinking, well, I'm going to go with nickel silver frets now, and then down the road I'm going to swap them out for stainless steel, you might want to think twice about that, because the amount of work that's necessary to do it, well, it comes down to that time is money thing. And you would find that going to that level is just not worth it. So I would keep the frets and the nut on the higher end. If you need to spend money there, spend money there. Don't try to skimp and save money with the idea that it'll work, it'll be just fine, or I'm going to swap it out later on, because it's just not really something that's advisable with those two components. But everything else on the guitar, you can swap out and change. Now, I didn't really mention anything about finish, because in truth, finish is so complicated. There's so many different styles of finishes out there. And if you want a particular kind of finish, there's really no cheap way to do it. Now, I've had people say, well, I don't want to spray finishes because that means I have to buy a spray gun and a compressor and do all that kind of stuff. And yeah, that's true. You have to do that. I mean, you'll see a lot of videos on YouTube where people are doing rattle can finishes, and you can possibly get a decent finish out of that. But the chances of success with rattle cans is far lower than what it is if you've got a quality spray gun and compressor and can do all that kind of work. Otherwise, what you have to do in order to save money is to look at a much simpler type of finish, such as a hand-rubbed oil finish. And that just doesn't work in every situation. So you can save money there, but that's something I'm going to leave up to you to do the research on based on what your expectations are for the outcome of the guitar that you want to build. So I hope you found this video to be useful. If so, give it a thumbs up. You know the drill. What I would like for you guys to do is if you have any additional tips that you think might be helpful, post them down in the comments section below, because that's where we all learn. And remember, when you click that thumbs up button, that tells YouTube to promote my video to other people with similar interests. And then those people are liable to share their experiences in the comments section. So we all benefit, we all learn. So click that thumbs up button. And of course, if you want to take your support to the next level, you can do some of the things I mentioned earlier in this video. And as always, until the next episode, take care, stay safe, and I hope you'll be back for more of these guitar building videos.